Greetings everyone, welcome to the next video covering this self-described journey of rebuilding a T56 transmission myself. Continuing along with trying to show you as much detail as I can on how this process is going. In the last video I disassembled the case, all the major components, got everything laid out on the bench. I left everything at that stage until I could get all the parts in. In the last video I think I covered some of the inspection that I did where I found some parts that were damaged or worn and needed to be replaced, and I wanted to try avoiding disassembling those small things like the synchronizer assemblies until I got all the parts in that I needed to minimize the risk of taking everything apart, ordering all the parts, and then a week or two later, once I've got everything in hand, forgetting how it goes back together. Now all the parts are here, and I just wanted to kind of run through and show you what all I'm going to be replacing. I'm also going to try to do my best to tally up every single penny that I've spent on this so far, including tools, so that you can decide if this is right for you to do or if you just want to pay someone else to do it. Starting out, I've got a new input shaft seal. I've also got a new tail housing drive shaft seal to go on the rear. I've got new shift keys for first and second and third and fourth gears for the synchronizer assembly. I didn't go billet on these. I just didn't see the need to, since I'm not going to be really, driving this thing super hard, racing it, anything like that. I also wanted to complement the Hurst billet shifter that I've got and try to make it even noisier if possible. Get all those drivetrain noises resonating right up through the stick into the cabin. Not sure why, it just seemed like a good idea to me at the time. But I got a bronze Isolator bushing cup that the end of the shifter fits down into. We'll see how that works out. Got another eBay package here. It wasn't shipped this way, I should point out. It did come in a plastic bag, but I wanted to open it up and kind of see what all is in here. This should be a complete set of new lock rings and snap rings, as well as fork pads. I decided to go with the original styled plastic fork pad. So this is that small parts kit. Again, hopefully should be all the roll pins, snap rings, everything that I need should be in here. In this package I've got a new first or second gear outer ring for the synchronizer assembly. I'm going to put this on the second gear side, I think. That one looked a little bit worn to me, though now looking at the new one it doesn't look as worn as I thought, but either way I've already got the part, so I'm going to use it. I also have a complete set of carbon fiber synchronizer rings from Synchro Tech. They included a sticker, which is always nice when you get a sticker on a $200 order. That's what my life's all about right there. It's got everything for first through sixth gear and reverse. It's pretty easy to figure out where these rings go on the transmission, even if you just ignore the part numbers, but we've got T56 1. There's going to be two of those. It's the same part number, but it's going to go first or second gear side on the synchronizer assembly. As I said though, it's pretty easy to tell where these go just because of the size. Each gear is sized differently. So we've got T56 3, T56 5. You can see the difference in the size hopefully there. It's pretty clear. We got another T56 5, another T56 3, and I bet you'll never guess what the R is for. T56 Reverse. And while we're on the topic of these here synchronizer blocker rings, whatever they're called, I want to point out that in the Tremec manual, I cannot find where it specifically mentions this. I've kind of just briefly scanned through it, but on the interwebs, it does recommend strongly that you take these and you soak them in ATF for at least 30 minutes before reassembly. If you're the type that only uses the best, you can always get yourself some synthetic name brand ATF, which is fine if you're using the carbon fiber rings. I'm not sure honestly that you can even get the paper rings anymore that were used in the early T56, but you can go that route. You could be a little bit cheap while you're at the parts store, get some of their store brand ATF, or if you're like me and you forgot to get ATF at all while you're at the parts store, and then later on remember while you're grocery shopping, you could just swing by the automotive section in the grocery store and get yourself some of this fine fluid, which is what I did. And that might be a risky move, but let's see if it pays off. I've got myself a Tupperware container that I snagged out of the kitchen. I'm going to go ahead and throw these blocker rings in there, get them soaking before I forget. Looks like the container is just the perfect size. Before I get these all covered in fluid, I thought I would point out it's kind of neat. You can see there is actual carbon fiber in these things. I'm going to try to actually arrange these real quick in such a way that I don't have to fill this container so much, so that when I knock it down on the floor later, it's less of a mess to clean up. Yeah, something like that. I can't imagine that reverse gear is that important in soaking, but I threw it in there anyway, because why not? And where can I put this that it won't get knocked over? These parts came from Amp Distributing. I'll put a link to them down in the description. No affiliation really, I just thought that their prices were reasonable. I also liked that they're from my home state of Texas. And shipping was unbelievably quick for not being that expensive. I think it cost me $8.50 shipping or something like that for this box. And I couldn't believe how quick it got to the house here. So that was really nice. This part happens to be the T56 34 slider, I'm assuming, either synchronizer or slider. Let me show you the difference between this one and the one I pulled out. This here is the one that I pulled out, and the teeth are pretty rounded over in some places. The new one, these teeth are so crisp and so sharp. I've also got a similar part, but it's for 1 and 2. This was the most expensive piece besides the synchronizers that I had to buy. This is T56 second gear. Basically, we've got a similar situation to what's happening on the sliders. So I got myself a new second gear. This one, I can't remember how much it was, honestly. Put it up on the screen for you. But it's the same thing on that new slider. I mean, these teeth are just so crisp and nice and sharp, and I'm really hoping that'll smooth out my first to second shifts a little bit. I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and try to do the input shaft seal, get that out, get the new one in, and then I'll start working my way through all the synchronizer assemblies. This input seal I definitely want to replace while I'm in here. Here's where you would also want to go ahead and replace any bearing races that are worn or anything like that. You want to check your all the shafts for end play. The details for that are actually pretty well covered in the manual. And honestly, you know, there's a couple of videos out there that show some good tricks to do that as well. Again, as I mentioned in the previous video, I'm not replacing any of the bearings and races. That would mean that I would have to re-shim the transmission. And at this point, the shim kits are not available anywhere online. They're back ordered everywhere. I'm skipping that step. I'm going to just replacing the seal right now. And you can get an idea of the seal. This is the new one. By comparing the orientation to the old one, you can tell that the old one is in there like this. There are seal puller tools out there. Generally, I just try to use a flat blade screwdriver. As long as you're careful, that usually works okay. Try to work your way kind of around it and gradually push it out. Be careful not to damage your bearing race, of course, or the adapter plate on the transmission. But normally, you can walk these out of here pretty easy with just a screwdriver. Like that. Just be careful not to gouge up in here where the outer part of the seal needs to be pressed pretty tight against the adapter plate here. I'm going to get in here with a rag and wipe out, try to get any dirt or grit or anything out before I try to tap in the new seal. The old seal was just set flush right here with the case. You can see on the input shaft where it had been riding. Kind of polishes the shaft as it turns in there. The trick is to get this in there straight. I think since I have a press, I might use it. If you get the right size socket, you can tap it down in there. They also make seal driving tools, which I'd really like to get one of these days. But I think for now, I'm gonna use a socket and the press to press that down in there. Which, if everything goes to plan, should go something like this. I'm using a 32 millimeter socket, which I don't know, it could be a little bit on the small side. I'll check it and see. See if it's driving in there straight. It appears to be. I suppose if you couldn't find a socket that's the right size, you could, in theory, get a good solid washer, or maybe a couple of washers, and use that to press it in. 32 millimeters is a little bit large for, you know, socket size. It's not commonly in a set, but it is the right diameter, the right size for the pinion nut on the GM 10 bolt in the F body, if I remember correctly. So I think that's how that one ended up in my toolkit. I might be overly cautious about this, but I like to stop and check and see how far it's in. It looks like it's just about right. It looks like I'm just about there. Maybe it needs to be a hair deeper. I'll go ahead and take the input shaft and check where the seal is riding on there, just to be sure. It's not much force to press one of these in at all, by the way. If it takes a lot of work to get it in there, something's not right. It looks just about right, but to be sure, I put some assembly goo, transmission assembly goo, on the shaft here. I'm going to see how far that seal pushes that up. And that should give me a pretty good idea of where that seal will be riding on the shaft with everything put back together. It's probably hard to see on the camera, but I can tell here that the seal did wipe the grease up to just where that polished spot on the input shaft was, so that seating depth should be just perfect where it is. With the front seal installed, I've just got the front plate of the transmission off to the side. I'm pretty much done with it until it comes time for reassembly. Now I want to start working on the synchronizer assemblies. This is the 3/4 assembly. It was pretty much disassembled inadvertently when I was playing around with it, trying to work the slider back and forth, and the slider came off, the keys came out, the springs remained in the hub here. To remove those, you're just going to use a flat blade screwdriver, but be pretty careful because, as you can see, that spring is under a fair bit of tension in there, so watch your eyes, that kind of thing, when you take the spring out, because it can fly across the shop pretty easy, or at your face. The slider is pretty much trashed, so I'm going to move that off out of the way. I've got the new slider here. As I pointed out earlier, it's gorgeous, it's pristine. That slider is going to go on the hub, which is what we pressed off of the shaft in the first video, off the main shaft. But it's got to go in there and be aligned with, in the inside here, let me get that to focus. The inside right here is a recess. There's 3 of them that go around the inside of the slider. Right there, you can see that one pretty well. And there's the 3rd one. Those need to be aligned with your hub so that the space, the keyways here, are aligned and centered up with the slider. So for me, I think it's just easier to drop the hub into the slider. Just make sure everything is lined up. And double check everything. And then we can place the keys in there like so. By the way, the keys are going to go with the little bump facing towards the outside and the little tabs facing towards the hub. If you're using billet keys, your spring is likely going to have a hook on both sides, if I'm not mistaken, but the stock style stamped keys are going to have the hook on just one end of the spring. That hook on the end of the spring, it needs to go in to the recess on the key. I'll zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. That hook goes on the inside of the key, right there. And then you're going to work your spring around, trying not to eject it across the shop. I'm going to use my screwdriver to kind of assist here. And then I'm going to try to work those keys into the slots in the hub so that they're kind of contained. And that key really wants to come out, and that spring really wants to come out. When all is said and done, it should look something like that. Then, because you don't want both springs going the same way, easy way to do it is just flip your assembly over. And just, again, be careful, all this stuff's under spring tension and is going to want to find a place that doesn't have spring tension. Kind of make a note of where you started with your hook, because your other spring, that hook is going to go in the same key and you're going to go the same direction, even though really technically it's not the same direction. It's actually the opposite direction, but we've got the synchronizer flipped over, so technically it's the opposite direction, even though it looks the same. So it's like same, but not the same, but different, but still same. We're going to work those keys into their home, those little notches that were in the center of the outer slider. Now I can work on the second gear assembly. Again, make note of how you took it off so that it goes back on the same way. Kind of try to take these things apart as an entire unit if I can, and then this will go back on the gear like so. This can take off in an entire assembly as well. Here you get to see what a controlled disassembly of this looks like, not the accidental one that I did on the 3/4 assembly, but you want to take your screwdriver and you can hook this spring right in here and then kind of pry towards the center and work its way up. And then we can flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. You can see it's kind of starting to want to work its way out already, but just be careful to contain it. There we go. And then you can take the keys out or just pull the slider off. Here's the new slider. Again, I got to make sure that I line up the recesses for the shift keys and put everything where it's supposed to go there. And then I can drop in the new keys. And we can do the same thing with our ring. Again, just kind of hook it down in the recess of the key. Get it started in there, grab your screwdriver, pry it on in, flip everything over, start in the same key and go the same way around. Get the keys worked in where they're supposed to go. Feels like they found their way on their own, maybe, I don't know. And then check and make sure, kind of, you know, if you're in doubt, you can just look over the top. Back ring goes around this way, front ring goes around that way, that's good. And then I'll just put the synchronizer assembly back together, like so. So that's the 3rd and 4th gear synchronizer assembly. The 1st and 2nd assembly, that means I need to do 5th, which is over here on the bench. This is the synchronizer assembly for 5th and 6th gear. I'm going to have to use my snap ring pliers. There's a snap ring right here, so I'll need to take that off. I'm going to try to lay everything out on the bench the way it goes, and thank God I'm filming this, so if I happen to forget, I can always go back and look at the video later. So there is the snap ring, or lock ring, whatever. So here's something that's a little concerning for me that I just happened to notice. The manual states that the 5th and 6th synchronizer assembly and 5th drive gear blocker ring will press off with the 5th drive gear. 5th gear should be floating, that's not an issue, but when it says something should press off and, you know, you can do that, that's not always a good thing. Let's see how bad this is. Am I going to order more parts? Alright, so let's slide this off, or out of the 5th gear. There are needle bearings inside. I'm just going to leave those where they are for now. Let's get this cleaned up a little bit and actually see how bad the counter shaft extension, let's try to see how bad this actually looks. I think this might be something I need to address. Well, this really sucks. I should have caught this. I should have disassembled this and looked at it sooner. 6th gear side is pristine on the slider, and 6th gear looks great. 5th gear, on the other hand, looks like somebody tried to jam it in gear without the clutch fully disengaged or something. I don't know. I mean, it's pretty far. 5th gear is a reach on the F bodies, but it looks like somebody missed that a time or two, or just, I don't know what happened. That's crazy. I mean, you can just see the engagement teeth are obliterated on one side. Although, driving the car, I would never think that there was an issue with 5th gear. So this is just a good lesson. I mean, maybe I should have taken this apart and just put it back together, or just taken it apart and did my best to remember how to put it back together. But man, I think I might be looking at a new 5.6 slider and maybe a new 5th gear. I think the gear is good enough, but that slider, let me see. The other issue is that, you know, yes, this should be a press fit on the shaft. It really should be, but it's not. And that could be worn splines on the shaft, or it could be the cuts in the slider or the hub are worn, or a little bit of both. I'm going to step back for a second and weigh this out in my mind. Right now I'm leaning towards just keeping 5th gear as it is, since I'm not experiencing any symptoms or issues shifting into 5th gear, but I might go ahead and have to order this slider, which is going to set me back another few days for sure, but I'd rather do this right, or at least right-ish. I have to admit, I'm pretty disappointed right now, a little bit in myself mostly. You know, the situations like this happen, that's no big deal, but I should have caught this sooner. You know, with the 5th gear side installed on the shaft, you couldn't see it that well, and I just checked the 6th gear side and it is pristine, so I assumed 5th gear would be as well. I'm thinking somebody must have underestimated the amount of distance that 5th gear is over on the shift pattern, and maybe let the clutch out a little too quick or something. I don't know. I don't know how that would even happen. If this was somebody else's transmission or somebody else's car, I would advocate replacing 5th gear most likely, possibly replacing the counter shaft extension, because this synchronizer assembly, as said in the manual, should have to be pressed off and pressed back on. That being said, the splines aren't that worn. Also, neither is the hub on the synchronizer assembly. Worst case scenario in this situation would be that those would shear off. I don't think that's likely unless I'm going to be out there just hammering on it in 5th gear all the time. That's not going to happen. The next issue that could arise, and one that's a possibility, is a little bit of vibration here or something like that, which, man, I got to admit the fact that my car has 240,000 miles on it. It hasn't been that well taken care of. It's not a collector's item. We're not talking about a, 2002, last of the breed car or anything here. So what I'm going to do, I think, moving forward, is I'm going to go ahead and just reassemble this, put it off to the side for now, move on with what I can with the parts I have. I'm going to order a new slider for the 5th and 6th gear assembly. I'm going to check these keys real quick, make sure they're okay, but this is going to have to wait until I get the parts from AMP, and that should be middle of next week. So if I come out here after work, I might still get it back in the car by next weekend. We'll see. Let's see what we can do with the parts we've got for now. I've got my new bronze cup, and then I've also got my small parts kit, which is mostly snap rings, which are useless at this point until I can start putting everything back together. But you know what I can do? I can take care of the fork pads, get those replaced. So I'm going to dig those out of the package. I think I'm going to do that. Listen here, I can't tell you about those fancy bronze fork pads, but these factory style nylon ones just pry off. They've got little dimples that retain them on the fork. Each fork is going to have 2 pads. You can see these are a little bit worn from gliding in the synchronizer sliders, but they really look pretty good, honestly. I'm just replacing them because they were part of this kit. There are ones that are sized for first and second and third and fourth. Those are the larger ones. Fifth and sixth are going to be quite a bit smaller. But all you got to do is pry the old ones off and pop the new ones on. The fifth, sixth, and reverse pads, those smaller, are the same process. It looks as though the Isolator Cup is glued in here, so I'm going to have to probably just use force to get it out. Maybe just this punch might get the job done. Yep. And let's see how hard it's going to be to fit this bronze cup in. It might just drop in. It might not. It started to drop in, as you can see, but I think it's going to need to be negotiated with just a little bit. It took a little bit of whacking with the hammer, but I got it right in there. So at least, you know, I've made a little bit of progress today, even though I can't actually finish anything. After standing here at the bench feeling sorry for myself for about 10 seconds because I don't have all the parts that I need to get everything completely done, I finally kind of came to my senses and I realized I can still assemble and install third gear and the synchronizer. I can still do the same for first and second gear, so let's do that. I'm gonna get my synchronizer assembly out of the way for third gear. That means that I can take off the old third gear synchronizer blocker ring, reach in here and grab the new one that's been marinating. Oh yeah, oh, that's awesome. I want to say it's one of the larger ones, pretty sure. Oh yeah. Oh gosh. Yep. So get that out of there, slap it down on the gear. Probably not necessary at all, but this is the product I'm using. It's LubeGuard Assembly Goo. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that and kind of work it into the needle bearings here. I mean, honestly, fresh fluid and the old fluid that's already on here is probably going to be enough, but I just feel better giving it a little bit of something extra. Since it's been sitting dry for almost 2 weeks now, I'm not using a whole lot of it, just enough to give it a little bit of something to lube it up a little bit until everything gets flowing back and soaked and seeped into all the places it's supposed to be. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wow, this guy is like not replacing all these parts, but he's using assembly goo? Yes, I am. And no, I'm not. Now I can fish out my third gear synchronizer that's been marinating for a couple of hours now. I just want to make sure I got the right one, and yes, I do. So I can throw that on there. And then the, almost forgot the little thrust washer. And then the synchronizer hub assembly thing. And the fourth gear blocker ring just gets put on the input shaft. So here's the old one, and there is the new one. So that just goes on the end of the input shaft, and then the input shaft is just going to get dropped back in to the front plate. But before I do that, I'm going to add a little bit of assembly goo to the tapered bearing here as well. As far as pressing the third gear synchronizer back on, I'm going to set up the press like so. I've got the main shaft supported by this little collar on my plates. Here is the needle bearing and the thrust washer. Then I'm going to put on third gear and the, make sure your blocker ring is on there. Then I'm going to put the synchronizer hub on like so. I am definitely wearing my safety glasses for this part. I looked all around to try to find something that would work really well to press this back on. It's got to be pressing on the center hub, not the outer slider. You have to press on the hub. And the best thing I could find was a piece of conduit coupling, which is not ideal and possibly not strong enough and could explode and maim me, but that's okay. I really wish I could have found something metal though. That would have been a lot better. And of course I need something to keep the press from just going down the middle of it, so I think I'm going to try a block of wood. Again, not the best choice, but I don't have anything steel around me right now. Maybe I could go look. I looked all through the garage. I looked through my scrap metal. I couldn't find anything. I can't believe that, but I'm just going to try this like it is for now, and we shall see what happens. As worn as everything else is on this transmission, it may not take that much force to get this down on there. Of course, soon I'm going to want to check and see how much more I got to press. A little bit more. But hey, at least so far, neither this block of wood or this plastic collar has exploded. So that's pretty cool. A little bit more to go. I'm sure there is some specific tool for this that's probably very expensive that you could buy, and if you ask me what my actual recommendation is, that is what you should do. Don't do it this way. Basically, I've got to squish this down enough that I can get the snap ring or the lock ring to go back on. Okay, that feels like it's bottoming out there, so I think that's as much as I can get it to go on. Let's take a look over on the bench and see if it's in all the way. Now with the third gear and 3/4 synchronizer assembly in, I went into my parts kit, picked out the fresh lock ring and safety glasses engaged. At minimum a safety squint, but probably safety glasses, man. This thing was a pain to get off. I'm sure it's not going to be much easier to get on. It's just that it's a pretty large ring, and I think it's just a little too big for these lock ring pliers, to be honest with you. By the way, the lock ring pliers I'm using are these here. If you can get something maybe larger with a wider spread, it'll make getting this lock ring in. This is really the only one that's given me any problems. Second gear and its synchronizer assembly are going to be next. Again, I'm going to put some goo on the needle bearings real quick. I've got the needle bearing gooed down in there, so I'm just going to take everything out of the stack and put it as it would go. So here is where I can swap out my new friction cone. Got to make sure it's turned so that it drops down in the grooves there. Toss this one out. I'm also, while I'm at it, going to replace this outer ring. Probably not real necessary. Like I said, when I inspected it the first time, it looked more worn than it is, but either way, might as well use it since I've got it. Toss out the old one. Then now I can put the synchronizer assembly, and again the keys have to line up with the outer ring, so I'll just kind of gently turn it until it drops down in there like that, and then I'm going to pull these apart again in the order they go. You know what, I'm actually just going to grab the synchro or the blocker ring and do it this way. Toss the old one, grab the new one that's been marinating, drop it down in there. And you can kind of already tell that that old one was pretty worn out because it was sitting down in the below the ridge here. This one actually is sticking up just a little bit. And then these two pieces, I'm just going to drop back in like that. Now everything's stacked in here the way that it's going to go once it's assembled on the shaft. So let me go ahead and head over to the press, reconfigure it, and I'll show you how I've got it set up once I've got that figured out. So I kind of pre-assembled everything off camera, but I'm going to show you the best way I can what I did. I really wanted to do this on the press to show you, kind of how everything goes, but the reality is it's hard to do with even 3 hands, much less with 2. All right, so this is the 3rd, 4th synchronizer assembly. Here's the 3rd gear blocker ring, and this is 3rd gear. We just pressed that on. This is the collar that I had resting on the plates when we pressed that on. Now, 2nd gear slides on from this end of the shaft, and the caged bearing is inside of it. That bearing rides on the shiny surface here. So this gets butted up against that collar there. Of course, then you've got all of the synchronizer assembly here. So we've got the cone there. Then we've got our clutch cone and outer ring there. And then last, we've got the actual synchronizer assembly and hub that's going to go like that. Sometimes on this channel we get to learn together, and I wanted to point out a mistake that I was about to make, and that I think is pretty easy for the average person to also make when they're looking at these diagrams. Looking at the diagram at first, it looks like you would put this entire synchronizer assembly together and then press it on with this entire stack on the shaft and everything organized like I was showing that I was doing it. But I'm questioning that now, because this final piece in the stack needs to line up with these splines, and it's possible to try to press this together with these not quite aligned and either damage the main shaft or break some of the inside teeth off of this thing. So what I'm thinking is the way to do it is to get yourself that tool like this, piece of conduit, but preferably something metal, and then use this to press on the synchronizer hub without any of this extra stuff in it over here, without your blocker rings or any of that in it, and then try to assemble the rest of it. I'm going to try that because that makes more sense to me, and looking at the diagram again, that might be what they're trying to convey. It's not real clear, but I think that's what they're trying to get at. So let's try this again. I know by now this video is probably just running on, but there just aren't many good videos that I could find to help me reassemble one of these. I see a few videos that show how to disassemble and some that show portions of the assembly process, but I really wanted to try to put something together that's pretty complete and pretty comprehensive. I really do believe that just about anybody that's determined enough could do this. It's pretty intimidating at first, but I really think anybody could do this if they put their mind to it. So I changed things up. I'm just using my piece of conduit. Quick prayer that it doesn't explode still. Let's try to get this pressed a little bit more, because right now, see how much 2nd gear moves up and down? It shouldn't be that way. Safety squint. Yeah, it's definitely moving a lot farther down, and that feels like it bottomed out there. So I think this is a much better way to do it. Don't bother, I might even just edit that part out the way I attempted to do it before, but use yourself a tool like this, and then we'll figure out how to get the rest of that stack on now that we've got a little bit of space to do it. I love it when I'm right. Sometimes I just wish I didn't have to be wrong first. It was a lot easier to get this seated in the way that I did it after just using my little conduit coupler. Now, when I go to stack this back together in here for the synchronizer assembly, got to rotate this until the keys line up and it'll pop right in. Okay, then I got to come in and got my friction cone, clutch cone, whatever you want to call it. And then the inner cone goes on. And remember how I was talking about these splines right here were hard to get lined up with this little piece. Now I can put it in there, line it right up, and drop it right in. And if I'm lucky, it should be seated enough that I can put my lock ring in as well. So let's try that. Got my new lock ring out of the small parts kit. So let's slide this all the way down. And with any luck, everything should be seated just enough now that I can get the lock ring on. And it does look as though, it does look like I might have to press it just a little bit more to get this lock ring to, you know, lock. So I'll run it back over to the press, get everything pushed back down. It's just, oh man, like a couple thousandths or so that this needs to squeeze in to be able to get that lock ring in. I'd be lying to you if I said that this job was super easy, but so far it's certainly doable. I've got the lock ring locked in now, so second gear is not moving back and forth anymore. Changing up that method of pressing did the trick. Everything is in here, so now let's see what's next. With the 3/4 synchronizer, third gear, second gear, and the 1/2 synchronizer assembly on the main shaft, I should be able to kind of start stacking things back onto the front plate again. And I'm going to go ahead and start doing that just because that's going to be the easiest way for me to start assembling this stuff. Before I forget, however, I've already scraped the RTV, the old stuff, off the front plate down here, but I'm going to wipe it up with some acetone and a clean rag just to try to get this as clean as I can before, like I said, I forget to do this. So the nice thing about acetone is it's really effective at cleaning up the old RTV. And if you're curious if you have any cuts on your hand that maybe you didn't know about, you'll be sure to find that out as well. I'll give it another wipe down once I'm ready to install the case, but for now I just want to make sure I get the real big globs of RTV out of the way. And of course you don't want to forget to put on the blocker ring for fourth gear. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of assembly grease on the tapered bearing here on the end, and then just a little bit down in the race where that's going to ride. And if you're concerned that it might interfere with the transmission fluid, supposedly this is what it's designed for, and it should dissolve rather rapidly once the fluid is kind of sloshing around in there, and it hopefully shouldn't cause any issues. Now I'm going to go ahead and drop the main shaft. I didn't mean to drop it, it just kind of fell in there. So here we've got first gear, and got another caged bearing for first gear. Guess what I'm going to do with that? How did you know? And then now I should be able to drop first gear. I mean gently lower first gear down on the main shaft here, over that caged bearing, and down onto the synchronizer. And I can see there is a huge difference between the amount of clearance between the blocker ring and the cone on the gear. Those synchronizers didn't look that worn out when I took them off, but now I can get a pretty good idea of how worn they really were. Next comes the tapered bearing, again thoroughly covered in Smurf paste, and then the little rubber O-ring. So the manual is just one picture of how this goes together, assembled. It's not step by step. I could go grab my laptop and look at the video, I suppose, of disassembly, or I could do the fun thing and fumble with it forever and try to guess until I get it right. Let's do that. Getting the counter shaft in isn't too bad. Just kind of lean your main shaft over a little bit or kind of pull it out if you need to. You just kind of have to be able to get the gears to mesh for everything to really fall into place. And next is the shift levers. I've been dreading that a lot, and this is gonna be a matter of trial and error, I feel. Perhaps even I should have tried to put these in. Yep. I think this right here is why you don't see a lot of videos of people putting these things together. I've finally got it figured out. My recommendation is watch my disassembly video and pay really close attention to how this is set up when it comes off. On top of that, when you disassemble yours, take really good pictures of how it comes apart. I went ahead and pulled the main shaft back out, put the shift assembly for third and fourth gear and second and first onto the main shaft, then placed it back into the front plate. The shift linkage, the shift shaft goes in the front here. Your fifth, sixth, and reverse linkage or shaft is going to go over here in the case. Your fifth and sixth linkage have to interface over here on this side. So you've got reverse is the farthest in, 5, 6 is here, 3, 4 is in the middle, and this is for first and second gear. Right here is a ledge. This ledge needs to be lined up with the, every one of these little linkage plates is going to have a slot cut in it that this ledge runs in. That ledge is broken. There's a path between it, and then there's a little pin that, I wish I had gotten better pictures of this, but I'm not taking it back apart again. There is a little pin that moves up and down. So when you rotate the shifter, this whole ledge and pin move left and right. That allows the pin to line up with first and second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and reverse. So it's rotating like this. When you push the stick forward or backward, it's going to move these. So like, let's say you're in first gear, it's going to pull this into first gear. Then when you pull back into second, it's going to lever this down into second gear. So what I've managed to do so far is get all of this assembled to where I think it works. I've also managed to get the case started, and let me show you the hardest part about that right now. Now, along with trying to thread the main shift shaft up through the case, trying not to twist it or push it and shove something into gear down here before you're ready to, on top of that, you also have to put this detent lever, which has the spring and ball on the back side of it, by the way, which is going to be slick because everything in here is covered with transmission fluid, and you've got to try to keep that from firing across your garage or your shop whilst sliding the case down. So without disturbing anything, because I am very afraid of like causing myself a whole bunch more work here. Basically, as you're lowering the case down, the shift shaft is going to be coming up through here, and then you have to try to get this detent with the ball stuck in the detent plate in the rear, threaded down on this shaft while you're trying to lift the case, which isn't super heavy, but it's heavy enough that it's really awkward. What finally worked for me was taking the detent, placing it with the ball in the neutral position on the detent plate, kind of holding it with my thumb while I was holding the case with my hand like this from the bottom. And after like the 10th or 11th try, I was able to finally get the stars to align. And I think I finally have this in here with the detent ball not fired across my shop. I think I have it. It's just kind of precariously, the case is just kind of resting up here. So I'm going to try very carefully to clean the rest of the case, some acetone, put some RTV down, and lower this case down. I might try to test fit it first, see if it'll kind of, if I can get the guide bolts in. I think that's probably the best idea. That way I'm not wasting a bunch of RTV and making a huge mess. So let me try that real quick and see what we can do. So now I'm going to try to lower this down. I'm going to try really carefully to lower this the rest of the way down without disturbing too much or jamming it into a gear that I don't want it to be in. Like that. That went into 4th gear, which is not really what I wanted. Get that back into neutral. So why isn't this wanting to slide? Oh. Maybe if I take the punch out of the hole. Oh, look at that. Look how much easier it goes when you take the punch out of the little hole that you were trying to hold everything together with. All right. Maybe, just maybe now, maybe this will work. Thing is, I've got to try to get my guide pin bolts in. Some people say to use Loctite on these. I think I'm going to skip it. It's not mentioned in the manual, and I don't really see a need as tight as they were to get out without any obvious thread locker on there. Down in here, I got to try to get this to line up a little bit. Okay. I think maybe, just maybe, that should be close enough. Let's go ahead and slap a punch in there for now. Or is it punch a slap? I don't know. And then what I would like to do is try to thread these in and see if I can get it to catch the slots that they're supposed to be in. I went ahead and pulled the case back off, worked on rearranging everything, you know, making sure that those shift shafts were lined up. Put the case back on just to test fit it, and I was finally able to get the guide pin bolt to line up just by lifting up a little bit on the reverse N56 shift shaft. So now I'm going to pull the case back off, go ahead and RTV this joint here, put it back on, and I'm hoping so hard, so much, that I'll have a repeat on this luck and be able to get everything back together, and then finally try to run it through a few gears here on the bench and see what happens. Please wish me luck. You're just gonna have to give me a break on this. There's a few things in this world that I'm good at, and applying RTV is not one of them. I'm more of a gasket guy, but you know, sometimes that's just all you got. All right, now I might have the chance to kind of show you how I managed somehow to get all this together. Let me get the case here, kind of get it ready. What I had to do is basically, here's your detent. I'm gonna put the spring in it, and it of course fills up the whole crevice there, so there's nothing left to hold your detent ball. Kind of take the detent ball, hold it like that, try to get it in the neutral position, and of course drop it, because that's just how this is going to go. Don't get frustrated. Alright, so kind of try to hold it like that, and try not to get too much grease on the bottom flange. And of course, can't see anything now. I think I can. Okay, there we go. So there's the shift shaft going through the detent. The ball, now I don't have to worry about it flying out. Got to make sure that I didn't jam it into 4th gear down here, which I didn't. Try again to not really touch the bottom of the case too much. It's pretty difficult to try to slide this down without it binding somewhere. I'm missing the pin in the rear. What's holding me up here? Okay, I don't think I messed anything up. It looks like it's still pretty much in the neutral position on the detent. I gotta get my little bore light out and try to see where the guide pin goes. I think that's just about right to try to start the pin at least. Yep, I hope this works. I've been fighting with this for so long. Try to get the guide pin in for the reverse and 5/6 shift shaft. And so far, it seems to be working okay. I probably put too much RTV on there. Like I said, I don't have much experience with the stuff. I pretty much just use gaskets when I can. I'm a little terrified right now. I mean, I feel like I've made progress, but I feel like I could totally not have made progress at the same time. I don't really know anymore. I don't know what to believe. But I think for now I'm gonna get these pretty close to torque. I'm gonna put the bolts in the bell housing or the adapter plate. Don't know how I'm gonna do that yet, but I'll figure it out. And then, oh God, I hope I'm done with this pretty soon. I'm just gonna say that my level of excitement for this project is not quite as high as it was when I started. And I miss my car, so there's that. For right now, I've just got this propped up on a 2x4 so I can get underneath it and start to put a couple of bolts to hold the case to the plate. Just need to get them in there at least kind of finger tight for now so that I can lay the case down on its side and get the rest of the bolts down in there. The instructions on the RTV, actually bothered to read it, say to wait, well, to finger tighten the bolts and then wait an hour and then tighten. So I guess I'll get these in here finger tight and then come back in an hour. If you'd like to go ahead and give me a score on my RTV skills, go ahead and leave that down in the comments below. See, down here are all the juicy bits with all the clutch material. Be careful with that stuff. Apparently it's got like asbestos and things that are not so good for you. Just be kind of careful. Don't go, you know, snorting this stuff or anything. Unless you're into that. Just be aware of the risks. It's moments like this where you wonder, what have I forgotten? What didn't I put in here that I was supposed to? Because right now I'm looking at the workbench. I don't know. I don't see anything, but that doesn't mean something didn't roll behind the bench. And now we wait. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to sit out here for an hour. I'm going to go inside, have a snack, come back. Didn't mean for that to rhyme. I'm just going to give this some time, and then I'll come back and torque it. It's been about an hour now, so I can go ahead and torque the bolts here for the adapter plate to the main housing. Those are 26 pounds on that. The guide pins are 20 pounds. Kind of want to point out, if you are shimming your transmission, if you've replaced bearings or anything like that, you would do that before you RTV everything together. There is a good video on YouTube that I'll try to link to if you are looking to shim the transmission and check the specs. It's all in the manual, but there's a guy that has a pretty good video, if I remember correctly, on how to do that. I'm not doing that because I can't get shims anyway. So I'm just going to skip straight to using my super scientifically accurate Harbor Freight Click Type 3/8 torque wrench, purchased with a coupon of course. Set it to 20 foot-pounds and go ahead and go guide bolts first. I know I joke a lot on my channel about torquing things to spec, but this is something that I don't advise skipping that on, so I'm going to do it the right way this time. These are 26 foot-pounds, so I'm going to get as close to that as I can with what I got. And I'm not going to go straight to torque spec on these right off the bat. I'm going to kind of try to alternate a little bit across the case so that I'm tightening everything pretty evenly, kind of like you would when you do your lug nuts. I'm just going to gradually sneak up on the 26 foot-pounds. And a lot of people nag or complain about these Harbor Freight torque wrenches. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, they never click. And that may be the case on a handful of them. But so far, mine have never let me down. And no, they don't click very loud. You have to kind of pay attention to what you're doing, but they do click and they do work for me. And 26 foot-pounds doesn't sound like a lot, but I mean, you've got this many bolts going around the entire circumference. It's plenty to hold the thing together. Torqued. At this point, I'm gonna call that it for now. I gotta order that 5.6 slider and wait for that to come in. Unfortunately, the nice run of 70-degree days that we had down here on the coast is over, but the good news is I've got my new 5.6 Synchro slider. Basically, it came with the new hub for the center part and the new slider that goes around the outside. Hopefully that will be a tighter fit on the counter shaft extension piece. So what I'm going to do is pull the keys and the spring off of this synchronizer assembly, put it onto the new synchronizer assembly, and then hopefully get this thing put together this evening. Let's see what happens. Swapping over the keys and the springs should be pretty similar to doing the other synchronizer assemblies that we've done. Before I forget, I need to take this synchronizer blocker ring, toss it in the parts bin, come over here, get my new one that has been soaking for well over 30 minutes. That's good to know. And slide that onto 5th gear. And never mind about the press, I didn't realize that as soon as I slid this down on the extension that it just slid down all the way, so I don't need to press it on, I guess, is the nice part, but at the same time it really means that it wasn't quite worth spending the extra on the center part. I think this extension is just a little bit worn, so it is what it is. I mean, this thing's got a lot of miles. Let's just keep going anyway. On these lock rings, I wanted to show you something. If you can see this one, how it's kind of beveled, it's almost got a like a V shape cut into the ends. If you put that on the wrong way, it's almost impossible to get off. So, for example, if you're putting this snap ring right here, you want to do it with the smaller end of the snap ring facing away from the part that you're trying to secure. If you do it the other way, your snap ring pliers are just going to pop out of that V over and over and over again, and it's going to be a really big hassle to try to get that snap ring off later on. I learned that assembling the main shaft before I put the case on. If you ever want to be able to get this thing off without it being really difficult, do the snap ring like that. That way the pliers can actually bite on that sharp point and pull the ring off. If you can see, that's kind of what you want it to look like in the end, with the point facing, with the point at the top of the ring essentially. Otherwise, it's just going to never come off. Before I get started assembling the counter shaft extension and putting all the gears back on the main shaft, I want to go ahead and get the roll pins put in and the levers reinstalled here. Got to clean the gasket surface here. Well, it's not really so much a gasket surface as it is just where the RTV needs to go. And be careful when you're removing old RTV. I don't like to use razor blades or anything. I don't want to really scrape up the aluminum on here. You can get those little plastic razor blades work okay, but acetone again works really great at getting that stuff loose. Just get the rag damp and start rubbing, and the RTV lets loose fairly easily. I for a second thought I had messed up pretty bad yet again. It's okay, that only would have been like the 5th time during this project. But as I was trying to put in the skip shift lever, which, I mean, honestly, I don't have skip shift enabled anyway, so, but I don't know, it's there, so I may as well go back in the case. I couldn't get it to slide down in here. Then I remembered that when I was disassembling it, I could take the main shift shaft, rotate it slightly, and then the lever can fit all the way down. And then I'll just put it back in the neutral position and I can start driving in these roll pins. Got a new roll pin out of the parts kit, so I'm going to get it situated down in here and start driving it in. These roll pins that came in this kit are pretty serious. They're pretty solid, so shouldn't have to worry about them backing out at least. So that one's in. I'm gonna grab another one and then try to get this skip shift lever lined up. Skip shift, by the way, is, I mean, I get that car manufacturers have to meet emission standards and stuff, but that was really annoying when you got to go from first to fourth just because your computer's like, nope, nope, no second gear for you. Roll pins are in. I cleaned the surface here where the cover plate is going to go and acetoned it as well as the back side of the plate to make sure that all the oils are off of there. Applied some RTV. By the way, if you want to know how to get RTV that looks this good, I do teach a weekend class. No, I'm just kidding. I put entirely too much RTV because I like to party. And now I can go ahead and put the cover plate on. Areas right here are where that goop grease can come in handy to try to hold the roller bearings on and those kinds of things again. So I've got that there. I've also got my new blocker ring for 6th gear. I'm going to put that on 6th gear. I'm going to slide 6th gear and the blocker ring onto the extension. Like so, and then there's a thrust washer that goes down in here as well, and hopefully some of that goop will help to hold that on. Thankfully this part's pretty well covered in the manual, so I know I'm not getting super close up on this, but if you get yourself that Tremec manual, this is one of the areas that's actually covered very well. Now that I've got this whole mess together, get all my new snap and lock rings out of the way here. I want to put on the fork for 5th and 6th. I'm going to try to get this entire stack just like this to go down into the transmission case. I'm going to have to lower the counter shaft extension down in here. I'll show you where that goes. And then I also need to get the fork for 5th and 6th to go down on the shift shaft here at the same time. That grease should do a fine job of holding that thrust washer in and try to drop everything down in here without smashing my fingers too badly. Then next I need to take one of my new snap rings to lock in the fork for 5th and 6th gear. And I'll put in a shot of how that goes so you can see what I'm actually doing down in the case here. Okay, so I got 5th and 6th gear fork now secured on the shift shaft. Now I can press the 5th and 6th driven gear in. I wouldn't necessarily, if you're doing this and yours actually needs to be press fit, I wouldn't necessarily do this on the actual press because you're going to be putting all that force down on the main shaft and actually on the front plate of the transmission, on the bearing race and on the aluminum plate. Those aren't really designed for that kind of force. If it was me, I would either get the proper tool or fabricate some kind of tool in order to press this down on here. Really, what's supposed to happen, according to what I can tell from the drawings, is you're supposed to thread a tool into the end of the shaft, and it's essentially a big piece of pipe. And then from there, you would screw, press the 5th, 6th driven gear down in here. Looking at the drawing and the manual, I would bet that just about any of you could make a tool that'll do the same thing and do it properly. Again, I know it's kind of a risky move to not replace the main shaft or get it machined and to keep using this gear the way it is, but it's not that worn yet. And if I keep in mind that really hammering on it in 5th gear and 6th gear is going to wear these splines and the gear, I should be okay. I don't think it should be too much of a problem. Also keep in mind that if you are pressing this gear on, even just slipping it on, you do have to kind of rotate your counter shaft extension just a little bit so that the gears can mesh. Don't try to cram it on there if the teeth on the gears aren't interfacing. Take your time. You know, if you need to rotate either the main shaft or the counter shaft a little bit, do that. Make sure you're not breaking any teeth off your gears. Now it's time to install the reverse portion of the transmission. And the next step should be this reverse synchronizer assembly. On this one, what I did is I separated out the springs and the keys, just like I did on the other synchronizer assemblies. I left the hub and the center oriented the same way that it was when I removed it, and I just flipped the outer slider. So now I've got fresh teeth to engage with the synchronizer on reverse gear. The confusing part for me was this right here. There's a retainer ring plate. I'll have to look up the official name for this. When I disassembled the transmission, this was actually just sitting on top of 5th gear. I don't know if the person that was in this transmission before me did that and just set it on there, or if this worked loose over time. Tremec says officially that you need to replace this, which is what I recommend doing. I did not want to wait around for more parts again, so what I did is I took this plate and the little teeth that bite onto the hub here, kind of flattened them back out with the screwdriver so that they'd get a good bite on this, the outer portion of this part of the hub. And then now, hopefully, this should stay where it's supposed to be. Its purpose is to retain the keys in the synchronizer. Wish I'd filmed that a little bit better, but it was a matter of figuring it out as I went, and that's what it's going to look like when it's done. You'll have these little tabs over the keys, at least I hope. That's the best guess that I could come up with the information I could find, because the manual on this shows how it's assembled, but it doesn't get real specific. Now I'm going to put on the reverse synchronizer assembly. The reverse shift fork is just going to go on like that. Then I'm going to slide this all down the main shaft, line up the 5th, 6th, and reverse shaft, and drop that down on the splines right here on the main shaft. And then once this is situated, should be able to put the snap ring on here to retain the synchronizer assembly. Also, wanted to point out the little sloped part on the synchronizer, or the fork, is going to go facing up. And because Tremec says not to reuse this here snap ring, got a fancy new one. I'm going to put that on the shift shaft here. After the snap ring for the fork is in place, we need to put one down here for the hub on the synchronizer. Once the lock ring's in place, you can put in the synchronizer. Again, rotate it until it locks in with the synchronizer keys, and should fall down into place. Then the wavy washer, the needle bearing for reverse gear, but of course I'm going to goop it up first. Gooped. Then reverse gear. thrust washer, and a new lock ring. Next goes the spacer, the needle bearing, goopy, of course, another spacer, and another lock ring. Oh my gosh, I'm getting so close. Maybe, if I don't jinx it, we'll see. Then, oddly, yet another snap ring. It looks like this one's going to go right here where these splines are machined out. I believe this is what is going to retain the speedometer gear, or the, I think it's called like a reluctor ring. I don't know, it makes the speedometer work. It says to press this on, but over so many miles, it doesn't seem to be required on this transmission, sadly. Next comes the little rubber donut seal thing, like that. And then, believe it or not, I think it's finally time to put the tail housing on. And that means more acetone, a clean rag, and we're going to clean up this. I'm also going to do the same on the tail housing itself, the mating surface there, so everything is good and ready for the RTV. Before it's actually RTV time though, I'm going to go ahead and clean up this mating surface on the tail housing as well. Again, entirely too much RTV, but you know, I bought 3 tubes thinking I would need all of them. And somehow, I'm still on the first one. I suppose now is also a good time to put in the magnets before I forget to reinstall those. They just kind of slide into these little recesses here, like that, and then they'll get held in place by the tail housing as well. Now is a really good time to check your bench for any parts that you might have missed. So far, all I'm seeing is my new tail shaft seal. Tail shaft seal? Anyway, the seal that goes on the back. I've got a roll pin, and then I've also got the shift lever that's going to get roll pinned into here once the housing is on. That's all I see, so I think I'm okay to go ahead and drop this down on here. As I drop the tail housing on, I'm going to try to keep my greasy fingers off of the mating surface here. I've also gone ahead and pressed in the new bushing for the tail shaft, or the drive shaft yoke, tail housing, whatever you want to call that. I skipped filming that part because that was a pretty hackish method that I used, and technically, from my understanding, the tail shaft bushing on this is a topic of debate on how the right way is to do it. So there's plenty of information out there on how to do that if you need to replace your bushing. Now I've just got to try to figure out what I did with the tail housing bolts. Found them. They were buried under a pile of rags and all kinds of other stuff. I'm just going to get these started for now and finger tight like with the other parts that we've RTV'd during this process, and then come back after an hour and torque them down to spec. On second thought, just because I have to wait for the RTV to do its thing before torquing these bolts down doesn't mean that I have to stop right now. I'm just going to make a note of the time, and I'm going to go ahead and install the shift lever here. It's the same method as I did with the other roll pinned items here on the transmission. like so. I'm also going to go ahead and put in my new tail shaft seal. I'm going to lube it up with a little bit of ATF to hopefully get it to slip in a little easier. Could have used the press to do this, but I don't really have the right size tool to press this in very well, especially with it having the extra sleeve on it. But I think if I use a large punch and just work my way around very carefully, that should be just fine. This is not at all the ideal way to do this, but has anything about this project been ideal yet? No. That is set flush with the case just about, but I'm going to take a slightly smaller punch, try to drive it down a little bit farther. Just be careful not to tear up the housing on the transmission. Not exactly the way I'd really recommend to do this, but it does work in a pinch if that's what you got to do. Just go slow and work your way around so everything goes even. Don't whack too hard because you don't want to really tear up the seal itself either, but that should be pretty well seated in there now. I think I'm almost there. This could be it. 3 weeks in the making right here. It's been an hour, so now I can go ahead and torque down the extension housing bolts again to 26 foot-pounds with the Harbor Freight clicky-clacky wrench. I'm going to try to do the same method I did on the front adapter and kind of work my way in a crisscross pattern rather than just tightening one side of the housing all the way down and working in a circle. Alright, so everything is torqued down now on the tail housing. All that's left is I'm going to clean up where the shifter mounts here so I can put some fresh RTV in that once it's in the car, and this thing is ready to go back in. I'll let you know how everything worked out.
That's it for this video, but I'll be posting a follow-up as soon as I can get at least a few hundred miles on this freshened up T56. If you enjoyed this video, help me out by hitting that like button. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more automotive DIY content, including plenty of other F-Body related videos. As always, thanks for watching.